I think we're going. Oh, look, we're bigger. What's that, Roger? What are you?
Come on, you know what this is.
For everyone in the vlog casting world that can't see this, Roger's got a huge globe.
I'm spinning a globe.
One of those things you saw on your teacher's desk when you were in elementary school before we had this little thing called the internet, where you could actually look up countries. We've got a spinning globe.
Right.
Is that one of the trinkets that you sell on eBay?
No, this is John Krasinski's shtick. Some Good News?
John Krasinski's.
Right. Did you watch any of those Some Good News?
Well, you made me. Yes, I did watch those. It was quite funny.
They were great.
They were good. I admit they were very good.
No, I thought we could do our version of, since they encouraged, copyright infringement there, that we could. I wonder if Some Good News would be a sponsor.
I think Some Good News probably wants to be a sponsor. Right now, we're fighting off sponsors. For Roger and I, it's really more of a situation of vetting which sponsors we want and which ones we don't. Because they're coming in like crazy right now.
I still say we go with Apple.
By the way, we might, that's still a 50-50, all right?
All
but
right.
before we go any further with that, I do need to clarify something that you got wrong in the last podcast.
I don't think it was me.
Rob Abercrombie was sponsoring the last podcast, even though he didn't know he was sponsoring the last podcast.
Thank you, Rob. Yes.
But I inadvertently got the wrong real estate company. So Rob Abercrombie, the Rob Abercrombie team, is actually with Keller Williams. Let me get closer to the mic. Keller Williams.
Keller Williams.
And the Rob Abercrombie team sponsored last week's podcast and, this week's too. As far as I know.
Keller Williams.
Williams.
Not Killer Williams.
Nope, that's a different thing. Keller Williams.
Keller Williams. These are wonderful people.
They are.
They help you.
And he works with Becca Abercrombie.
Yes.
Which is his wife. And thank you, Becca, for your
support.
Everything, your support too.
We love you.
And then there's Katie Van Houten also with the Abercrombie team.
That's right.
I don't even
Katie
know.
Works.
Yeah,
okay.
I don't know everyone in the office, but I love all of you, even if I don't know you. Thank you for sponsoring today's vlogcast.
Yes.
And Some Good News, also a sponsor. Thank you for your.
John,
You and I, we're going to do lunch someday. I'll have my agent get in touch with your agent, and we'll see if we can work you in. My schedule's pretty slammed.
Name the movie.
Hitch. In case you're not following.
Something we do on occasion. But did you ever watch The Office? I mean, John, did you ever watch?
I've watched it since. I watched it in the last year. I know everyone else was watching it 10 years ago. I actually just started watching it in the last year.
Come on, it's Steve Carell.
I know. That's how far behind I am.
All right, your favorite Steve Carell line.
I can't say it on our vlogcast. But I did love the one. The world's greatest boss. He's holding his mug. It says so right here. He's a self-proclaimed. This is great. He's a self-proclaimed greatest boss ever. I love that.
The line I like is in that. Would I rather my employees love me or fear me? And he says, I think I want them to be afraid of how much they love me.
That's good. I like him.
This corn is an angel.
I don't know him. But if the office wants to sponsor
Inglorious
Pastords. By the way, for some of you that you could be checking in late, maybe you just jumped in on Season 1, Episode 4. You're listening to Inglorious Pastords.
Inglorious Pastords, right.
Hey, I saw something this week that when I was looking up the domain names for Inglorious Pastords, I found out something.
I'm dying to find out, Bruce.
Well, apparently some other pastors in 2010 did a thing called Inglorious Pastors.
Really?
Yeah. So...
We had no idea previous.
No, we didn't.
Nor did Rob, who helped name, I don't think, yes.
Rob's
a good
Keller
guy.
Williams.
Keller Williams.
Yes. So, so what's all the good news that we're talking about today, Raj? And why the heck are we in matching t-shirts? Because we haven't done that since we were like 8 years old, when our mom would match all three boys in the exact same outfit. Like we were triplets or something, which we weren't.
I recall the three leisure suits.
Oh my gosh, yes.
In various shades of
you
plaid.
had the hideous brown. I had a hideous green. It was like forest green. And Mom insisted on these silk Hawaiian shirts with collars that looked like kites.
And bow ties, right?
Well, no, not with the leisure suit. Well, you were going a few years before when we had the plaid,
that's right.
3-button button-up suits and bow ties. We looked like Pee Wee Hermans in a suit.
But the shirts are part of the good news.
Yeah, they are.
SOS, Huntsville.
Save Our Sons.
So some friends of ours who started a group to get a diverse group of people around the table to talk about issues that affect race. Their motivation being, we'll tell the story behind Save Our Sons, that name. Okay. What does that name mean?
So April Bodie and Toya Poplar, when they started this, the original thing was we want to make sure that our sons literally don't lose their life in a traffic stop. Yeah. So they started this thing originally to educate particularly black young men on here's what you do when there's a traffic stop. So here's the way that you interact with a police officer, here's the things that you do, here's the things that you don't do, because they understood it was a very real threat that their children may not come home from a simple traffic stop. And
so many of my black friends have shared that story, which right. I remember the very first time I heard some friends talking about what they were sharing with their kids with the traffic stop, and then I heard that story again and again. We never had that conversation.
We didn't have that conversation. My only thought, when I thought about being pulled over, honestly, in a traffic stop as a young man, was how can I get out of this ticket? I mean, that was it. What thing can I say, true or untrue, that might help me get out of this ticket? But, we were raised in a culture that said, if you're in trouble or if you're afraid, you can go to a police officer. That's a place where you're going to have safety. But in the last several years, we've recognized that's not true for all of our friends.
Yeah, no, right. The feeling I would have when I saw lights in the background wasn't ever fear. Sometimes it was frustration. Oh, I didn't see him fast enough.
Well, you've only seen that like twice. I've seen it 57 times now.
No, we've seen it a lot of the same times. This is one of those funny places where you usually get the ticket, I usually get a warning.
No, there's no usually to it. The first time that I got pulled over, I got a warning. The next 37 times that I got pulled over, I got what's called a moving violation. And actually, it was funny. I thought they were speeding tickets. That's just what I call them. I was filling out an application one time, and they said, have you had any moving violations? And I'm like, no. Well, not that I know of. I always had permission to move into a home or move into an apartment. I literally did not know what a moving violation was until I found out I had 37 of them. So that sounds terrible, but that's only like one for each year that I've been driving since I was 16.
So,
come back to Save Our Sons.
Yeah, if I'm getting back to Save Our Sons, realizing how critical a story this is, but I think there was some point where they realized, part of the healing and things getting better is white and black and brown and different people learning more from each other. And so they went let it evolve to now this open table once a month, every 2 months, I think.
Once every other month.
Every other month. Get together and just have conversations around a meal. And there might be often a focus.
Right, like this month they're doing a focus the next Tuesday on Fathers and
tomorrow.
Sons. Oh, that's tomorrow,
yeah.
That's right. Well,
tomorrow for us.
On when you're listening or watching this vlogcast.
It's already happened.
It's already you don't know about it. It's good. You can look it up.
But so
it's called Potluck Poetry and Perspectives, and one of the things that they do that thrills me is they say we're going to allow any speaker to speak, and whether we agree with them or not, we will respect the person. We will give that person dignity, and so any person can share whatever they want.
Yep.
But you can't disrespect another person. The thing is, we're going to do this with dignity and respect, and it's very interesting the perspectives that you get from different groups that come. The very first one that I went to. They had a black police officer that came in that helped do some of the training, and it was interesting to hear his perspective because one of the things that he shared in that one is that his family worries about him coming home alive as well.
Yeah.
You know, every evening that,
another side.
that he goes
Yep.
out, which is another side to that. So for me, Save Our Sons has been a hugely healing place for me. But I'll also say this. It's been a challenging place for me in terms of challenging my own biases, my own perspectives on things. And it's been very educational for me. In other words, it's a place where I find myself listening more than I'm talking. And again, I'm paid to speak, and my temptation is to always speak or always to have an opinion on something. More and more, I find myself quietly listening and learning, versus sharing what I think I know about a thing.
Yeah. Well, and that's what it's been. Again, good news for me. It's been very good because hearing so many people even right now. Where do we go from here? What do I do? And again, a lot of people who look like me, really horrified and realizing some of the racial inequity is worse than I thought it was. There are issues that I used to kind of put off, and now, but what do I do now? And really, one of the first steps is starting to take a move towards relationships with people who don't look like you. And I don't know all of what your experience will be, but the grace we've had is just a number of black and brown friends who have been open to that.
Yes.
And start to share their stories and ask to hear ours and extend grace. And so Save Our Sons has now added to, it just really created a network of friendships that have gone far beyond where we're getting together, we're... well, again, you even work with Toya now. So, it's just now where diverse relationships are far more a part of our everyday lives. And gosh, what a grace that's been. Boy, moving towards those kind of relationships, it's just, it's huge.
Well, and I think for part of our story is part of our growth in this whole area, even of race relations and understanding systemic inequities, which I would say up to 10 years ago I was completely unaware of. But when we moved the church that we were leading at that time, back in 2014, when we moved that church into the projects where we were actually doing our worship services in the community center in the projects here in Huntsville, Alabama, that's where we began to really begin to understand some of the racial inequities that are still in place here in Huntsville, Alabama. One story that I'll never forget. So my assistant there at the church office was a young black lady, fantastic, has 2 children, just love her to death. And you have to understand, I had been working in that community for several years, going in and out of the community, driving in and out of the community. I was becoming known in that community. Well, my assistant also, worked in that community, and at one point was actually living in the projects right there where the church was meeting. And at one point, she got pulled over twice in the same day. Stay with me. Twice in the same day, because there was a light that was out above her license plate.
And because...
Twice in the same day.
And because there was an officer sitting at the entrance to her neighborhood.
Yep.
And I realized... And I live a couple of blocks now from Oscar Mason Center, that particular area. And this is the first neighborhood I've ever lived in where I will see from time to time a police officer sitting outside my neighborhood, and what we know is, of course, where officers are patrolling more, where there are going to be more stops. So again, our friend stopped once, left, came back, stopped again,
twice.
Same night.
And here's the thing. I'm going in and out of the same neighborhood on a regular basis. And remember, I have 37 moving violations. So, honestly, I know there's times where you are
going through the neighborhood.
A career moving violationist. I am. But you realize in all the years that we worked in that community, that I worked in that community, which was about a 5-year window for me, never once got pulled over for anything. So that's where I began to go. When she told, maybe there is a tiny bit of discrimination that I have been sheltered from. And it really, it was
not tiny.
Yeah, maybe it's not tiny, but it was really mind blowing to me. And Roger, that was part of the process of me really opening my eyes to, oh my goodness, that what our black brothers and sisters deal with every day is just totally different than what you and I deal with every day.
Right. And to realize again that even for officers or others, or for us, and by the way, no one here is saying we've got the racism thing figured out. Thank God ours is all gone. No, ours still keeps popping up and showing up and in different kinds of ways. What we're saying, we've started on a journey that our friends have helped us with to see the places where that we were blind to. Because like Bruce, I mean, first 4 decades or more of my life, absolutely clueless. Had no way of seeing the inequities, and largely because I had virtually no interaction with people who looked different than I do, and that has made a huge difference. I want to. Can we talk football a half second?
Why don't you talk football for a half second, Roger?
Well, this reminds me of Drew Brees,
Roger Goodell, Drew Brees.
So we're on a.
Oh, that's it. So, yes, I've been tracking this story as well.
But so a few days ago, Drew Brees being interviewed, just something along the lines, I really just can't have any sympathy for someone who's disrespecting the flag. And here talking about NFL protests and black players and some white players taking a knee or some kind of a protest. And he made this kind of statement. And, well, there was this immediate kind of backlash.
Right.
A lot of concern, even a couple players on his team approaching him, some very strong feelings and talking to him about that. And a couple days later, he apologizes. And there were a variety of responses. But one of the ones that hit home for me was a black brother that I saw kind of responding to some who were just throwing Drew, apology or not, I'm tired of whatever. And he just basically said something to the effect of, if I see someone taking a step to apologize, if I see someone, he might even address Roger Goodell, at least taking a step, moving this way, I don't want to discourage that. And I don't want to automatically assume the worst. And what that matters for me is I appreciate that because people like us are going to come in baby steps. And if the door gets shut entirely, we say a stupid thing like we have, then we get shut off from learning. And the grace we've gotten from the Toyas and the Aprils and the Freds and the Stephanies in our life has been a grace where when they've heard us say a typical thing, a stereotypical thing, that they'll speak to us, say a word, and that kind of grace, I think, is needed. Now, I'm not talking about, I know that kind of grace and forgiveness sometimes gets weaponized, where the white community, we just sort of expect our black brothers, forgive us again, and just sort of, but there needs to be this balance, and I loved that and appreciated that from this one black brother saying, we got to give some room for growth, and that's where Save Our Sons has been. That's why I'm learning. That's why I'm less racist than I used to be. Is that kind of attitude?
That's a great word. You would say you're less racist than you used to be.
Yes.
How long did it take you to realize that you were racist? Let's tell Roger's story today. I don't want to have to expose myself at all.
No, I think I can't remember. My memory is a dangerous place. Sort of when you have this light bulb moment, but I would say I remember, here's what I do remember.
Okay.
It started with relationships. So, and realizing how different the experiences my black and brown brothers and sisters had than I had had. I remember just most of my life thinking, life's equal, everything's the same.
Yeah.
16 years old, Chattanooga, Tennessee. I go apply for my first job. I get hired on the spot, and I'm thinking, gee, that was easy. And just nice, good high school kids who come in, whether their name is Roger or Ahmad or whatever, they just automatically get hired. Now, not paying attention, looking back, okay, all of the managers of that store that I applied for looked like me.
Yep.
And in fact, for the first 11 years of my work history, the only managers I would ever have all looked like me. So I lived in that kind of world. I was not able to start to see my racism and the stereotypes I had about my black and brown brothers and sisters until I started interacting with them, and I started realizing assumptions I had, and I'm starting to hear stories and thinking about. I still remember a friend of mine, we're sitting there talking, and we were going out to a lake house, kind of have, I think, a riding retreat.
That's right, yes.
Right, so we're out there.
Roger and I were going to the lake house first earlier.
Right, so it's out rural, out Tennessee, on the Tennessee River, beautiful spot, out in the rural country, and we invited a black friend to come with us. He said, I can't get off work, until later. And I said, well, you could just drive out after you come out. Come on out. We're going to be there all through the weekend. Come on out, whatever, no matter what time it is at night. And here's what I recall. Without blinking, he said, oh, I can't drive out in that rural area at night. I would never be able to do that. And he went on. There was no pause for effect.
No.
There was no, I would explain. In fact, he went on to the next thing. And what hit me was, it was matter of fact.
Yeah.
In other words, I've never thought about that. I've never had to deal.
Right, in case you're wondering, our friend knew that it would not be safe for him to be there after dark, just for all the potential implications. Right. Even the potential of being pulled over for some reason.
He got,
or for not a reason.
For people, you're going to realize, again, the white people who call about the suspicious black guy, the guy driving that car, the bird watcher, the kid playing in the park with a gun. I'm going to put a call into whatever. And if that person is black, often that does not go well. And our black brothers and sisters just understand that's a part of life. Well, no, I couldn't drive out in that part after night because I know what could happen. And the matter-of-factness hit me in the chest. And it was one more of story after story after story where I've learned, oh my goodness, my experience and the things I'm encountering are very different. The assumptions I've had, very even troubling at times, but it has started with moving out of, for the first 40 plus years of my life, my world was almost entirely white. I did not have virtually any other kind of relationship. So everything I believed, knew, thought, assumed about black and brown folks came out of my white community. And we had a lot of ideas wrong, and some seriously wrong, and some evil, broken ideas mixed in there that I still catch myself to this very day. I still have these moments where I feel a particular idea or a thought about a black brother and sister, and I realize, I know where that came from.
Right. So this is where it gets really hard. So over the weekend, I was taking a group out to the walls of Jericho, and I send everyone out. What I typically do on hiking trips is send everyone out on one of the days where they'll get an hour in solitude. And it's just it's an hour to go out and be with God and let God speak to you and listen for the voice of God. And I found myself the entire hour, Roger, thinking about a single word, which is bias. And I've been writing a word for the week every week this year in 2020. And I took a break from it last week because we were on vacation. But I'm like, all right, I want to write about this word bias, but I want to tell my story. And I found myself afraid Because if I'm honest about all of my biases or different biases, not just about black and brown, but about certain white people that live in certain places, biases that I have about, this is interesting, biases that I realized that I have about people that have high education, like a doctor's degree or a master's degree. I realized I had a bias against that was sort of subterranean, but it was also a defense mechanism. And here's what I realized when I was walking in this hour of solitude. I'm like, why do I have a bias? So my bias here's the difficult thing about implicit bias. So explicit bias would be like a racist who says, I don't like white people. I don't like this person. Or I actively do things against this person. So that's explicit bias. But implicit bias is when something is working in the background. You're not even aware of it. You don't even know where it came from, but it runs in the background. So when you see a certain person, you already have either a stereotypical idea about them or an idea from your own experience that makes you feel a certain way about them. And so the bias that I realized I had, even about people that had higher education, master's degrees, doctor's degrees, I would always, in my mind, say things like, oh, that person needs an external degree to validate them. All right, to validate that they're successful. And then I realized, and here's where I had to call myself out, it was actually a defense mechanism about the inferiority that I felt because I'm only a high school graduate. And sometimes biases are created even as a defense mechanism. Yeah. And here's what I realized about, for me, because I can't tell anyone else's story, all biases that I have, and I'm going to be laying some of them out in this, God help me, in this blog post about my own biases, they all come down to a single binary conversation, inferior and superior. Okay. It's just none of them were equal. It wasn't, oh, this is just different.
Right.
It always came down to inferior or superior.
Right.
And that broke my heart.
Yeah. And this is, in other words, this is since the beginning of, since sin entered the world, we can say this is actually one of the core things where constantly we find ourselves ranking, and we're looking for little cues that set us above people. This is the software, it's the broken software that's running in the background,
right.
that we constantly have to be challenging. We constantly have to, and this is why we need other people to be speaking in our lives. We need to be listening. And when someone says, I think you might have a bias, and you start to feel that,
defensive,
don't want to have this conversation anymore, whatever, that's when you need the conversation, because we need other people to help us see where we're wrong. Like I've been able to do for you so many times. Just think about how many times I've been able to help you see where you're terribly wrong.
Yes. And
I am God's gift to you.
And I've been careful to remove the 2x4 from my eye before I pointed out the speck in Roger's eye, because that's what Jesus said to do.
Yeah. My little speck, right? Yes. And that's unfortunately the way I often look at it. So I just see mine as the speck. But it turns out mine's a 4x4, actually.
So I want our listeners and our viewers, I want them to understand from your perspective why you participated in a peaceful protest last Monday.
I knew because a friend of mine was going. So first of all, I heard about this right away. But I have been in the years now of relationships with black and brown brothers and sisters. I've heard the stories, and so I've already known that there's inequity and there's injustice. And there's just a time where you say protest is a significant way of challenging. And we talk about it, really, because we talk in our country about freedom of speech and freedom of assembly.
Yep.
And that's a big
constitutional
deal.
protections, right.
Now, we got to ask, are we comfortable with everyone doing that? Or just people protesting what we protest or what we think is.
Right.
What I realized is, and the reason, it's good why you asked the question, because I've never been at a protest before.
Okay.
Never marched in a protest that I remember. But here, I felt like I have got to stand with my black brothers and sisters. And one of the things that I've heard is how significant it is that a protest reflects diversity.
Right.
Because my black brothers and sisters' voices have gotten tired, and there's a kind of fatigue from shouting and speaking and calling out the injustice on their own. And until people from the majority culture who are actually benefiting most from some of the inequities and those until we start speaking up, something important is missing. And even Dr. King and others would look and say things would start to change when some people in the majority culture started to get involved. And by the grace of God, there were some folks who looked like me who put their lives on the line, and that's not, who literally lost their lives.
Right.
And that's not me. So, going to a protest was a simple but important symbolic way of saying, I believe the injustice is happening. I believe it's not fair. I believe something needs to be done. And I'm going to get with a group of other people and say, things need to change. And I want people to know there's a diverse array of voices.
Yes.
And it was very, very good. Just another step for me in learning and thinking about using what's in my hand.
Yes.
Using what I have, and that's part of us even talking here today. What are our experiences? Let's share those. Let's put those out there.
And what has God gifted us to do? We both know that we're communicators, so we know that that's one of the gifts that we have to communicate. The most shocking, probably, statement that I heard from a trusted black pastor last week, as I was listening to a Facebook Live that he and others were doing out of Knoxville, shout out to the underground church there, he talked about, from his perspective, we don't just need white allies. We don't just need white co-conspirators, because both of those have been talked about.
Yep.
He said we need white leaders to get out front on this, because he said this is not a problem we created.
Right.
And I'm like, oh my gosh,
Yep.
I have never thought of it that way, because I've been in a season of my life where I felt like God has been really leading me more and more. Power that I have, I need to transfer that to those that have been historically deprived of power.
Yep.
Because I felt like that's the only way we're going to make a shift here. But this is a place where I feel like God is saying, no, on this one, Bruce, I want you to use your power, not just transfer power, but I want you to use the power, the influence that I've given you to get on the front end of this thing. Because as my black pastor friend said so eloquently, this is not a problem that we created.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, wow. We have got to get on the front end of this thing in terms of providing leadership.
Right. So that's been a good to hear, because I know your heart. I've interacted so many years where I want to be willing to defer to my black brothers and sisters, but to hear some of them say, no, you take. I remember listening. So when I was at the rally this last week, so a black brother's up at the podium. He says, I want to talk to the people who don't look like me in the audience. And he said,
wow, I can't wait.
He said, you use the power and influence that you have in your hand to make a difference. And so here he wasn't talking about, here, again, so white privilege is a thing, whatever, that could be another conversation. But I have a certain amount of influence. He wasn't decrying that. Nope. He wasn't shaming that. He was saying, use it.
Now, that sounds biblical. That just sounds like something Jesus would say. Whatever gift you've been given,
we should listen to Jesus?
I want you to steward that gift. Well, and here's one other thing, and I know we're all over the place today, but this is the other thing I've been thinking about protest and the importance of protest, because, Roger Goodell made the statement, for the NFL, we were wrong. which I think is an important step in the right direction. And I realize there's people on both sides of that. Here's the thing: if you speak out, there's going to be people on both sides responding, even to this vlogcast, that have different feelings about that. But I've been thinking a lot about not only my own biases and how biases affect the way that we interact with people, but I've been thinking about this idea just of protest, because sometimes we begin to protest the protest instead of protesting the problem. In other words, it takes our eyes off the problem. So we protest the protest, but we never look at the problem itself. For instance, I was thinking, well, would Jesus, did Jesus ever protest anything? And then I realized
he was very peaceful. He wouldn't go to.
He was the Prince of Peace. He said, I've come to bring a sword that's literally going to divide families on this issue. And one time, I don't know if you remember this, because I know I read the Bible so much more than you, but there was a time when he went into Jerusalem, and Scripture says he saw what was going on in the temple, and because it was late, he went on home. Now, I felt sure that was because Jesus was going to take time to count to 10. So if he was feeling any anger or righteous indignation, he was going to settle down. Well, apparently, overnight, Jesus put together a whip, which he took into the temple the next day. And not only did he overturn the tables violently of the money changers, because they were oppressing the poor. In other words, it wasn't just that. It wasn't. There was a place in the law. If a poor person didn't have a lamb to bring to Passover, they could buy 2 doves and bring that. So it wasn't just that. They were oppressing the poor. They were literally stealing from them, not only the money changers, but all the people that were selling things. And so Jesus was protesting the injustice of what was going on. But I guarantee you, a lot of the religious leaders began to protest his protest. Well, actually, they did. They said, "By what authority are you doing this? What authority do you have to protest this?" So that was one thing that I began to think through. What is the space where you do protest, where you, like Jesus, say, "Enough is enough, and I'm going to call this thing out, and I'm gonna call attention to it." Here's one last thing, and then we can move on or do whatever we need to do. I've been thinking about. Because you did another blog post this week that I thought was fantastic, but about the whole Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter and everyone's on different spaces with that thing. And I thought about several places where Jesus would say something like this. He would say, "Blessed are the poor." He would say, "I have come to preach good news to the poor." Was Jesus saying in that moment that wealthy people don't matter to God? That God doesn't care about wealthy people, that wealthy people don't need to hear the gospel?
Well, nothing about his life. That's what I loved about him. No.
4 different times that I can recall, he went one-on-one with wealthy people. Yep. Nicodemus, the rich young ruler, which Scripture says that he loved. Yep. He saw him and he loved him. He would Zacchaeus, Simon, the other Pharisee.
Yep.
So, but Jesus was what Jesus was saying. And what needed to be said to their culture was poor lives matter, marginalized lives matter, oppressed lives matter. He wasn't saying, I've come to preach good news to the poor, or blessed are the poor, that a wealthy person can't have that blessing. And I think there's a space in every culture where you have to say, we have to put a disproportionate priority on exposing the marginalization of any people group, whatever that is. And then you go to Matthew 25, and Jesus just talks about the people that are going to be, at the end of the day, invited into his kingdom are the people who cared about, one of the terms that you and Jesus have used a lot is the lost and the least. The lame and the blind and those without food and those without clothing and those without water, those that were sick, those that were in prison, that were incarcerated. Jesus over and over again placed a disproportionate emphasis, and I think gave priority to people in culture that were considered the least. And as a result, the implication being their lives didn't matter as much. And so that's why I believe there's a place in our culture to say, hey, where there's marginalization, where there is systemic racism, where there's oppression that's been going on for hundreds of years, it's important that we say these lives matter. In our culture. And in our culture, I think that's why I think it's important that we understand and are willing to say Black Lives Matter.
Right.
That is not saying that any other lives don't matter, but I think it's important to say, hey, we need to put a disproportionate emphasis right here because we've got serious systemic racism that still is in place in our culture.
And it's why you'll hear, again, a voice in the evangelical community that is often saying unborn lives matter.
Yes.
Again,
doesn't mean born lives don't matter.
Right. In other words, we're not. And that's born out of a belief that there is injustice going on here. That there's a group that is being forgotten. They're being exploited. They're being killed.
Yes.
Right. So a way of highlighting that is saying, yeah, unborn lives matter. I'm going to. And I guess maybe it's part of finishing with the idea. Sometimes if we're getting too caught up in the wording, it can be a reflection. With something going in our heart where we're just finding a way not to. Because I think this is one of the things where that so many of our black and brown brothers and sisters feel when there's this super fast all lives matter. It's born of this idea. We're not really saying that there's really any inequity here. We're not saying that our black and brown friends are facing anything any different than ours. There's nothing to see here. And that's sometimes actually what is going on. And so maybe it's just remind you to keep learning. I mean, that's where we are. And so much of our learning actually has come out of conversations like this. And Inglorious Pastords is about conversations that, hey, sit in with us. We're still thinking about ways that we can make it interactive. And we welcome even ideas there. Where can we get... I was looking at our podcast framework. Maybe we can have people can send in voice messages.
Yes.
But we want this continue to be interactive because it's just a conversation. But it's these kind of conversations, you and I together, but also these kind of conversations with black and brown friends that are continuing to shape us and move us a bit more towards the heart of Jesus. And so I guess it's a way to talk about a reminder again why we're doing this and how glad we are you're just listening today.
Yeah, and again, we're not assuming that we're right on everything. I do.
No.
We want to call a couple things I want to say as we finish. Number one, for people that look like me, it's really our responsibility to educate ourselves. In other words, we can't just put the burden on our black and brown brothers and sisters.
Tell us what to do. Tell us what to do.
Because frankly, they're tired. Okay,
tell us all about Black history.
I've had conversations with my black and brown friends. They just said we're kind of racially tired. And so people who look like me, we need to take the time to educate ourselves, to read books. When I read Michelle Alexander's book about mass incarceration, and I did a talk about that afterwards, that opened my eyes.
Crow, yep.
Yeah, the new Jim Crow. That opened my eyes to all sorts of things.
You're not a book reader.
Watch some movies.
13th. Yes. I would say start 13th. And this idea that everything's just been getting better since that little bad moment we had slavery. That wasn't good, but it's all been sort of getting better from here. Think again. Watch 13th.
Watch Just Mercy. Marlene and I just watched. We watched the first half of that last night. Again, another one of those heartbreaking but eye-opening movies about what's been taking place for a long time in our. So there's movies that you can watch that will help you understand that. But there's a lot of reading. Roger, I'm hoping I'm just going to throw you under the bus. Would you put some reading materials and some movie listings that people should watch?
Absolutely.
And they should read, because there's a lot of books that we've read that have helped us educate ourselves on the issue of systemic racism. The movies are hard for me, I'll be honest. I told Roger several years ago, I watched the movie 12 Years a Slave.
Yeah.
And literally, I lapsed into depression for almost 6 months. It was so eye-opening and brutal and raw, and it didn't just break it broke me. Yeah. And that began, and I think that was in 2014. But again, that was part of my own shift to I need to unlearn some things about history, and this is another vlogcast that we'll do, some things about our history that we were not taught in the white schools that I grew up in. that they just either put that under the rug or they framed it in a certain way. That's a whole nother story. But Roger put some notes in the podcast, the show notes. So movies you need to see and books you need to read as a part of that education process for yourself. Because ultimately we've got to do the hard work of educating ourselves on this issue and not just reading social media rants.
Keller Williams.
Rob
Abercrombie.
And thank you for, the sponsorship. We're sorry that Roger got it wrong in the last podcast.
Yes, check out the podcast and see who actually got it wrong.
And actually, for those that are in Huntsville, Alabama, I would encourage you to look up Save Our Sons Huntsville and consider becoming a part of that, because it's a place where relationships and conversations happen. Relationships are built, conversations happen that will stretch you and grow you. And I can't say enough about the organization and how much I appreciate the leaders, Toya Poplar and April Bodie in that.
And Chad and Melvin, their other hats.
Yes, Chad and Melvin as well.
We love you guys too.
Sorry about that, Chad and Melvin.
All right, episode 4.
Episode 4 is in the books, and season 1. So here's going forward.
That's right.
I'm going to just tell them real quick. We're trying to complete an entire season. We're going to get 10 episodes for season 1 that's going to release July 1st. If Roger gets all the technical... Yeah, we can. If Roger can get all the technical stuff done that he needs to. I'm responsible for content and biblical accuracy.
All right. Until we meet again, thanks for listening.
Bruce and Roger out. Emphasis on Bruce. Out.